All right. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are doing well. This is DFS Army's tournament strategy show where we will look at last night's slate, we'll look at today's slate and game plan for it. Really primarily focused on early strategy, guys who are standing out, talking through injury news. And so let's jump right into it. So the site I normally use to pull the 100K winning line from last night just doesn't have it. Full transparency, work got crazy yesterday. I was not able to play yesterday. Looks like it was a pretty insane slate. Looks like Tyus Jones was in the nuts line going up against Utah. So that was the Washington player. We knew it was going to be one of them. It ended up being him. Herder made the line. I'm not really sure what happened with the Kings to make that happen, but we know he has that streaky upside. DeRozan going up against the Lakers. We talked about him yesterday. Hometown game. Decent matchup. He made a lot of sense. Lauri Markkanen was one of those guys we liked a lot, so not surprised he made it. Pascal Siakam, we touched on him. He hasn't really shown a lot of upside so far since he has been with Indiana. We knew he was going to have one of these big games here soon. He had it last night, had a 61-point performer. Great game by him. Austin Reeves was in that line. John Collins was there, and then Ayo really wrapped it all up. So definitely an interesting line yesterday. Interesting slate. I know Joel Embiid burned a lot of people. We talk about it all the time here. Chalky studs are always viable to fade. They always are. It's always going to be that way. Personally, I would have played him yesterday. If I did play, I don't think he was a bad play by any means. But chalky studs, always viable fades. The one consistent in NBA DFS. All right, now moving on to today's slate. Yesterday's in the past. Let's look at today. We have an interesting one, guys. I was kind of hoping Kyrie Irving was going to play today. He's listed as questionable. He was not at shoot around this morning, so it's looking less and less likely he'll actually end up playing, but we'll see. If he's out, we're playing Luka. It's that simple. I think Luka's an even better play if Trae Young ends up playing tonight. Trae Young is questionable. He's been in concussion protocol. So we all know I like to pick on Trae Young a little bit. But either way, if Irving's out, Doncic is going to be in the vast majority of my lines today. But just like I said earlier, chalky studs are always viable fades. So again, I'm not going to go to my way to fade Doncic, but you're not stupid for considering it. And if you find other viable options, which I think there are some on this slate, I don't think that's a crazy approach by any means. Also, we already know if Kyrie Irving gets ruled out, it's really Tim Hardaway who benefits the most here. Josh Green also sees a nice boost in usage as well. And then some of the other pieces just become slightly more viable, but they're not must plays by any means. So this is also the highest game total on the slate as well, which is also an environment I love forcing exposure to. So yeah, I'm playing the Mavs tonight. What's up, Energy? Hope you're doing well, man. Win the Millie, Thomas Die. Hope you guys are both doing well. Let's see here. So yeah, the Mavs are good. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. I don't think that's sneaky. For the Atlanta Hawks, this is where things get a little bit more complicated, but not by much. I'm playing the Hawks tonight. That's just gonna happen. It's really just gonna depend on the injury news on who I'm going to play from this game. And thankfully, it's it's the earliest game on the slate, 7 o'clock, so we should get this news in time. Trae Young is questionable. Clint Capella is questionable. We all know if Capella's out, Okongwu at 4,600 will become a core play for me if Capella doesn't play. I'm crossing my fingers and toes, everything, hoping Capella actually ends up getting ruled out because it just makes the slate so much cleaner and you can play however many studs you want to and have decent pivots. But if that doesn't happen, we're still in an okay situation where both Okongwu and Capella would be viable, but not must plays. Trae Young being questionable obviously matters a lot. We saw Bogdanovic move into the starting lineup last time around. We would assume that would happen once again if Young gets ruled out. Boost to Murray, boost to Bogdanovic, and then boost to Johnson as well, but I'm playing Johnson no matter what here. So, long story short, we have to wait on the injury news to figure out what we're actually doing with the Hawks, but I'm playing them. highest total game on the slate, close spread. Hope it stays close. Doesn't really matter either way. I'm going to have a shit ton of these guys. Next up, we have the Suns going up against the Pacers. Again, a pretty solid total here at 243.5. And the spread isn't bad at 4.5. So for me, I have this struggle with the Suns pretty consistently and pretty often when they're healthy. Eric Gordon is questionable. That matters a little bit, but doesn't really change my approach too much here. Ultimately, my plan for Phoenix tonight is to play Bradley Beal. We'll see where his ownership lands. I'll be at least around field weight on Beal at 6,900. He has decent upside. Good game environment, like I said. Matchup for him is pretty neutral. So, totally fine attacking with Bradley Beal at this price tag. Sim Auto likes him as well. Decision then comes down to KD and Booker. I think I might have chose Durant last time. I don't really remember. It might have been Booker, and we would have hit on that. Booker had a pretty strong performance last time out. But I'm going KD today as the guy I want to have some exposure to, depending on his ownership. I don't expect it to be super high, but I would like to be around field weight if possible. And I say if possible because Luka's going to be such a priority for me on this slate that I want to try and get exposure to other pay-up options. But if that impacts how much Luka I can get, assuming Irving's out and hopefully Trae Young plays, then I'm willing to not have exposure to some of the other guys I like KD. It's a little bit of a balancing act there. And then, of course, we'll talk through execution and leverage plays, core plays on the pre-lock show. That's for VIP members only. Link in the description if you're interested in that. That's when we talk through, and we have most of the news by then, what we're actually doing. And I just show what I'm doing in the Domination Station. And you can follow some of the changes I make if you would like to. And then if you don't like it, of course, you don't have to follow it. Outside of that, not super interested in some of the other options here. Turner's been a pretty solid defender against guys like Nurkic here lately. They're ranked 23rd in fantasy points allowed to post bigs this season. So Nurkic isn't standing out to me too much at 6,600. And then for the Pacers going up against the Suns, we talked about it. Siakam finally had that ceiling performance. And so I understand if you want to go back to him, but I'm not trying to chase it. This matchup is pretty neutral, not too much standing out. But again, the game total is solid. So I don't think it's stupid to play Pascal Siakam. I doubt he'll be crazy high owned. If he's seeing 15, 20% ownership at that point, it's getting silly and it's getting cute. But if he's only like 10, anywhere from like 5 to 10% owned, I wouldn't be upset about matching the field to him at that point, just because he obviously has the ceiling now. Again, matchup is relatively neutral, strong game total, decent spread. So I'm okay with him at that price tag, just because he's been doing so much for the team. But I don't like him so much where I'm going to try to force exposure to him at this point. Miles Turner was fine yesterday as well. He did well against Embiid. We talked about it. Matchups against Joel Embiid for DFS purposes haven't really been bad as long as you can stay out of foul trouble. Today for Turner, pretty neutral matchup against Nurkic here. Price tag's fine, but I'm not overly excited about it. Again, ideally for me, when it comes to the center position today, I get to play Okongwu and Capella doesn't play. But if that doesn't happen and we don't have a ton of value at the center position, then guys like Miles Turner move up a little bit more for me in priority. Outside of that, Buddy Hield does have a nice matchup. Andrew Nembhard has a decent matchup going against Booker. Saw some upside from him in that last game against Philly. had an okay game against Denver, but I'm not trying to force exposure to Nembhard tonight. And Halliburton's out still, in case you're curious. Next up, we have the Rockets going up against the Hornets. Pretty low game total here. Decent spread. But oddly enough, I like a decent amount of people in this game. And most of it's just because the Hornets are not a very good defense right now. Let me pull up my notes on these guys. Oddly enough, they have been pretty solid defensively against guards for DFS purposes. They are ranked 30th in the league in fantasy points allowed, so they're not giving up a lot of points there. So, but with that said, Fred VanVleet, 7,700. Sim model likes him a good bit as well, and so that's why he's on my radar. But not someone I'm going to go crazy on, not someone I'm trying to force too much exposure to. I just like the spot, and the sim model likes him. Now, when it comes to Şengün, again, I like playing bigs against the Hornets. They have improved a little bit here recently, so it's not the same smash matchup, but he's been so good this season, and especially as of late. He's going to be super chalky. I think he becomes a slightly more viable fade, but on DK, he can play two centers, so it doesn't really matter. But if, again, we get that Okongwu value, he becomes a little bit less of a necessity. But if we don't, I plan on having a shit ton of Şengün once again. And then outside of that, Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks, they both see decent matchups here. Hornets have allowed a decent amount of points to forwards this season. They're actually allowing the most fantasy points allowed to scoring wings. But outside of that, I know Jalen Green had a pretty solid game against Portland the other night. Let me see how the sim feels about Jalen Green. It just kind of speaks to him having some upside, but he doesn't stand out too much in comparison to his peers. So I'm not trying to force exposure here. That's unnecessary. Again, it's a low game total, so I'm not trying to get too cute there. I am probably going a little extreme on the Hornets, but I like the spot. But before I dig into it, let's see. James said, what about my Harrison Barnes in single entry and Cam Thomas in the 77? Let's pretend it's skilled. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. I did not see that in the Discord, but I also didn't look that close. But you might have posted it there, or you could have posted it anywhere. I don't know, James. But that is awesome. That's a hell of a call, especially in high dollar contests. I don't think anyone was playing Cam Thomas yesterday. Congrats to you, man. That's a good win, hopefully. Jasmine, what's up? Hope you're doing well. Let's see here. So for the Hornets, I think the more clear plays are guys like Miles Bridges and Brandon Miller. Matchup itself going up against the Rockets, they're not teams I like to pick on too much. They've been solid defensively this season. We speak to that pretty often. So matchups for Bridges and Miller, not ideal, but their price tags are still solid. So I'm not planning on forcing exposure to Bridges and Miller, but they're projecting well. And we can add Nick Richardson to that conversation as well. They're projecting well enough where I expect them to show up a little bit for me. Ideally, I'll be around field weight, but I'm not trying to force exposure there. LaMelo Ball crushed us all in that last game. Everyone, well, actually, it was relatively low owned in that game too. But he made a lot of sense and was very viable, but he only scored 33 DK points against Detroit, which is disappointing. Today, he has a better matchup. The Rockets have been good, especially in their front court defensively, but they're allowing the seventh most points to guards this season. And so LaMelo Ball going up against FVB, no concerns there. He hurt me last time. Willing to go right back to him again today. And I expect him to be extremely low owned. And so I don't think he's going to be a hard to get to leverage play. He is a little expensive, but about Terry, I'm totally fine going to Ball tonight. Let's see here. Uh, Win the Millie, Miller or Middleton, same price, 6,300. I would, off the top of my head, I would go Miller, but I haven't compared them too closely, to be honest with you. Next up, we have the Clippers going up against the Rockets. For me, this Clippers team has been a little all over the place. That's why you see these three, Kawhi, PG, and Harden, priced so closely together, because they've all had some very strong games and some low-performing games. James Harden is the more obvious guy. He's been in better form, and he's also the cheapest here. Not overly concerned about the Raptors' defense these days. So James Harden, someone I want to be at least around field weight exposure on. PG disappointed greatly last time, but he still has 60-point upside. So I'm not afraid of trying to get to him. Not afraid of getting exposure there, because I don't think anyone else will. So I don't think I have to go too crazy in this spot. Decent game total. Spread is a little wide. Obviously concerned about a blowout, but I don't play for blowouts, so not going to go too crazy there. Of course, you can consider Kawhi, but it's kind of a coin flip for me between Kawhi and PG. I'm just leaning on PG because I expect them to be slightly lower owned. But I think they'll both be relatively sneaky with decent upside. And then other Clippers, I don't really like most of these guys. We know Plumlee and Tice are still splitting minutes, but they're priced appropriately, in my opinion, for what they've been doing. Now, the Raptors is another spot where things start to get interesting again. Emmanuel Quickley is out. This is his first game he's going to be out since he was traded to the Raptors. So, full transparency here. That means we don't know exactly what this rotation is going to look like. We don't know exactly what they're going to do. But I believe also this team defensively has not been good. And that's why I am forcing exposure to the Clippers, just because I like picking on the Raptors these days. But outside of that, when it comes to who we're playing on the Raptors, with Quickley out, Scotty Barnes is a 2.3% increase in usage. Also, Jakob Poeltl's been out for a while. Thad Young sees a 1.6% increase in usage. Gary Trent Jr. sees a 1.2% increase in usage. And that's really all that's worth mentioning here. Thad Young is already projecting well. He's already going to be in a decent amount of your lines at 3,900. I played on at least being around field weight exposure on Thad. I'll probably be slightly over the field on him if I had to make an educated guess on where we would land by the pre-lock show. Bruce Brown hasn't been on this team enough for him to really pop on the models when you take Quickley and Jakob Poeltl out. But I expect him to be more involved on this team with Quickley gone, and I also expect him to have a higher chance of having a ceiling performance in this spot. So, not a guarantee. We don't really know what's going to happen here, but I am comfortable taking a shot on Bruce Brown. RJ Barrett feels like more of the sure thing for me. There's never such thing as a sure thing in NBA DFS, but I like the spot for him. I like the price tag, and I think he's very appropriate here. And he's not super pricey, and there's a lot of good, viable, pricey plays on this slate. Scotty Barnes, again, does have the highest increase in usage with Quickley out. He's fine. I'm just not going to force exposure to him here at this point. And then Schroeder will definitely be more involved. And we talked about Gary Trent Jr. seeing an increase in usage. They're definitely viable as well. But I am not going to go as crazy on him here. Like, I'm not going to force exposure to these guys, is what I'm saying. Ideally, they'll show up for me a bit naturally. Anything else mentioning with these guys? Let me look a little closer at them. Darius, what's up, man? Hope you're doing well. Agreed. Let's get the money. Coach Chris, hope all is good. Power said, I don't know about that. He got those minutes because Porter got hurt 6 minutes in and didn't return. Yeah, if you... I know sometimes it's a little bit blurry, so sorry about that, guys. But for us in our optimizer, we only have him projected for 18 minutes right now. I know some other places around the industry have him projected for a bit more, like 23. I saw like 25 some places, which is probably a little bit more extreme. But for me, 18 minutes is pretty on par for what I would expect for him in just like a normal situation. So I don't feel like that's too elevated. Jaden McDaniels. Yeah, Jaden McDaniels was the last, or Jalen McDaniels. I don't know if you're talking about Jalen, but Jalen McDaniels was the last, the fourth guy I didn't mention who sees an increasing usage with quickly out. I don't think I'm getting there today unless there's someone else who gets hurt for this team or ends up getting ruled out. It's always interesting how my late slate score outscored my main slate. Yeah, that's crazy when that happens. I haven't played late slate NBA DFS in a minute, but I kind of miss it, to be honest. Especially today, because I really like that Spurs Portland game. It's just like Simons and Victor. Really like both of them today. Let's see. Yeah, we talked about them. Next up, we have the Magic. No worries, man. We're on the same page. We're on the same page. I knew what you're thinking. For the Magic, this team is pretty healthy at this point. Everyone's playing. Low game total. None of these guys stood out for me here. I think Paolo has upside, but I'm not really trying to chase it in this spot. Same with Franz. Wendell Carter's fine, but none of these guys are standing out for me too much. If you want to take a one-off shot, I don't think it's insane, but I'm not excited about it. I wonder how. Looks like Jackson is projecting well, but I didn't look too closely at him originally. Yeah, at 7,700, he's viable. He's fine. I don't hate it. I don't want to be significantly over the field on him, but I'm okay with him showing up. Contra at 4,400 is okay. Let me look at didn't mention the injury news for them. Luke Kennard was not on the injury report. And so Contra is one of those guys I'm a little bit more excited about when there's another guard injury. At 4,400, he's just a viable play. Again, just comfortable being around field weight, but not trying to go too crazy on him. Luke Kennard at 5,500 is priced appropriately. I think the only guy I'm okay being significantly over the field on at this point is Jaren Jackson Jr. Aldama's listed as questionable. It's okay if he shows up a little bit too, but not overly excited about this situation right now. They're just viable plays. And then David Rhodey too has been okay, but again, I'm not trying to get there too much either. So it's really Jackson, Kennard, Aldama, and Contra are the only guys I really plan on seeing show up today. But outside of that, not as excited about some of the other pieces here. Just not a game I like. That's pretty much the end of the story there. Next two games on the slate, things do get a little bit more interesting again. Thunder going up against the Pelicans. The issue for me in this game, we know SGA has been that guy all season. I'm interested in seeing where ownership will fall on everyone. It looks like that update just came in. And I'm also interested in seeing, assuming Kyrie doesn't play, let's look and see where we have Doncic actually from an ownership standpoint. 23%. I wonder how much higher that will go if Irving actually gets ruled out. Like, that's my biggest question, is just how much Doncic is everyone going to have today? And because I'm just going to match the field on it. I'm not going to try and fade it. You can, but I'm not going to today. And ideally, in the best case scenario, we have enough value where, let's say Luka's 50% owned. I can have 50% exposure to him and still be able to be around field weight on SGA and some of the other players I like. But realistically, that might not happen. SGA is one of those guys, unlike KD, I'm willing to prioritize. And so I would put in this case, if he stays around 8% ownership, I'll put a 10% min on him and make sure I'm at least around field weight exposure there. Outside of SGA, I'm going to check notes, make sure I'm on the same page here. Not overly excited about anyone. I know we've been playing Jalen Williams for a while now. His price tag is still exactly the same. It hasn't really changed much at all over the last few weeks. If we don't get a lot of value, I expect him to show up a little bit naturally just because at 7K he makes a good amount work, but not a lot pulling me towards the other Thunder here. Let me look a little bit closer at these matchups. Yeah. Pelicans have just been solid defensively this season. Yeah, not overly excited about anyone outside of SGA. Pelicans are healthy still, and when they are healthy, they're a little bit harder to predict, but with a solid game total, 240, one of the top 3 game totals on the slate, just like SGA, I am going to prioritize some of these guys. Zion has just been disappointing here lately. He's seeing decent ownership at 10% exposure. If he shows up naturally, which it looks like he probably will if the slate was going to lock right now, I'll be okay with that. But the one guy I'm going to prioritize is CJ McCollum. He's a little bit cheaper. He's been in better form. Sim model loves him, but it usually likes him, so I don't put that much weight into that one. SGA and crew haven't been allowing a ton of points to guards lately, so that does make me a little bit more nervous. It's really Joval who has the best matchup because Chet just has been allowing a lot of points. But Joval hasn't been seeing a ton of minutes here lately. Really low 20s, sometimes less than that. Really the most we've seen out of him this month, the most we've seen is around 27 minutes. So hard to get overly excited about that too. So ultimately, just because this team is healthy, a little bit more of a dart throw kind of approach here. You can take a shot on Ingram or Zion, but the only guy I'm prioritizing is CJ. Kay said, what exactly do you mean when you say you're going to match the field on a player? You're going to try to have the same of that player as the projected ownership? You're exactly right. That's what it is for me. So, like, if CJ is projected to be around 12% ownership, I want to be exactly at least at 12% ownership. And so for me, that means I'll probably have a 10% or a 15% min on someone like TJ. And then if I have more than that because of the optimizer, totally fine with that. But I want to make sure I'm at least matching the field. FanDuel just gave me $20. Anyone else get free money for them? That's sweet, man. I don't play on FanDuel too often, but maybe I'll give it a look and see. That'll be nice. Next up, we have the Cavaliers going up against the Bucks. For the Cavs, this team is pretty healthy at this point. I mean, Thompson's been suspended. And obviously Garland and Mobley have been out for a little while now, so I'm not really considering them. But outside of that, there's no real injury news that's moving too much for me at this point. Donovan Mitchell, I know he slowed down a good bit in that last game. Going off of memory here. But he's still been in good form. Not concerned about the matchup here. I'm playing Donovan Mitchell. He is looking pretty chalky, so that's not going to be a sneaky play by any means. But he's one of those guys, too, that I want to prioritize. Matchup against Damian Lillard. He's been struggling against guards like Donovan Mitchell, and I expect him to do well once again. Hopefully he can get a little bit closer to that 57, 60 point upside he has. Next up, Jared Allen is another guy I'm very comfortable going right back to here. Had a decent game against Milwaukee last time out. Ideally, he'll be able to surpass that here once again. So Mitchell and Allen are the main priorities. LeVert is viable. We don't have a ton of obvious value right now. Hopefully that does clear up, but he makes a lot of sense at this point. Decent neutral matchup. He does come off the bench, so that's something that, draws a little bit of concern, but his minutes have been pretty consistent and stable, playing around. On some occasions, he does play in the lower 20s, which is worrisome. You don't want to see that out of him today, even though he still had some 40-point performances in some of those low minute games, but he's also had some games where he's seen dramatically less. But long story short, ideally we see at least around 28 to 30 points out of LeVert, knowing he has more upside there if he can get hot. So not someone I'm super excited to play, but he's projecting well, and it makes sense for him to show up in a few of my lines, but not someone I want to have as a core player or anything like that. Max Strus is okay. Don't love Niang. Okoro, 3,700 is a solid value play. Never love Dean Wade, but never loved Dean Wade. Yeah, I know the sim likes him a little bit too, so I'm not going to X him out, but I don't want to go over 13% or 15% just to round up a little bit. Oh, looks like everyone's getting free money from FanDuel. What is going on? But yeah, Cavs are one of those teams I want exposure to tonight. The Bucks are tough. Giannis is 11K, but he's surrounded by guys like SGA and Luka Doncic, who are in Luka in particular, solid matchup, has another star player who's out. Really hard to not get excited about playing Luka and SGA over Giannis. To me, Giannis is just a pure contrarian play. If you're playing Giannis today, it's really just because he's relatively low owned. I don't see myself going there unless I'm able to just put a 5% min on him, just to have a little bit of exposure. But he's one of the last guys I would do that to. Before, just to, long story short, if you all don't watch the pre-lock show, I always uncheck, prioritize completing lineups above min/max exposures. And this way I have complete control over everyone who's showing up in my lines and guys I'm lowering exposure to. And so at a certain point, there's a such thing as too many mins or too many maxes on players. And so what I'm trying to say is that if I have too many, there's a list of players I'll have mins on tonight, and Giannis is going to be closer towards the bottom of that list. If I can get him in, that's awesome. But more likely than not, I probably won't be able to get there. Similar case for a lot of these guys. I know Chris Middleton is looking relatively chalky at 11% ownership. This Cavs team is just not a team I like to pick on. They've been solid defensively over the last few, really just this season in general, but they've really stepped it up here since the start of the new year. Let me look a little bit closer and see if maybe Chris Middleton has a softer matchup. Pretty neutral for Chris Middleton in particular. Cavs have allowed the 13th most points to scoring wing type of players like Chris Middleton. So neutral matchup, but not extremely ideal. Giannis does have a solid matchup. The Cavs have allowed the 6th most points to versatile forwards like Giannis. So there is a case to be made for Giannis here. But outside of that, they're top 5, top 10 defensively at every other position. So something to consider for sure. But I'm not excited about Milwaukee today, unfortunately. So just to wrap it all up, when I think about this slate, most of my exposure tonight, definitely if Trae Young ends up getting ruled out, will come from the Mavericks and Luka and a lot of the Atlanta Hawks. Taking some shots. I like the Suns. I like taking some shots on the Pacers. Rockets, I like getting exposure to, but I don't want to go too crazy here. Hornets, I like a few of the pieces here. I'm going to take a shot on Ball. Probably will be a leverage play for me tonight. Like Bridges, like Miller, but not going to go too crazy and forcing that. Ideally, it happens a little bit by itself. Clippers, I like taking shots on Harden and PG. Raptors, a solid amount of solid players there. Magic, I don't like. Memphis, I don't like. But if you want to take a shot on a few of them, like Jaren Jackson Jr., that's totally fine. Thunder are in a really good spot. Pelicans, but still didn't force too much there. But I'm going to dig a little bit deeper. I think there might be a few guys who might want to look a little bit closer out on the pre-lock show. Pelicans, tough to predict, but another team I want exposure to. As of right now, it's going to be CJ. I might get a little bit more interested in Ingram or Zion, but as of right now, don't love it. And I like the Cavs a good bit. So, interesting slate. I'm hoping news breaks in a way where we can have a lot more fun with it, but we'll see. Can't control everything. Anyway, I appreciate all the support, guys. Everyone who stuck through the entire show, always appreciate that. We'll be back on Monday if you're not able to join the pre-lock show. If you can join the pre-lock show, that's awesome. Reminder, link in the description there. Feel free to use promo code BOB for a 10% discount on that. So have a good one. Good luck, guys. Peace out. See y'all later. Bye.